The catman, Peter Criss, had eyes as ominous as the shadows on the stage and a face that was black and white. The sound of thunderous drums and a raw voice shouting Beth's agonizing words filled the arena. Kiss was the silent center of a kingdom, but people used to assume he was just the drummer. Beth and Kiss as we know them now would not exist without him. Peter Criss, one of the 4 founding members of the well-known rock group, contributed to the creation of a significant musical moment. That was beyond time. Kiss was never merely a song. It was an eruption of light and sound, fire, and magic that had never been heard or seen in the history of rock. Despite his fame, Peter was always the one who remained in the background, fighting against fate and himself in addition to his co-workers. He got dismissed multiple times rather than just once. He didn't make a big show of leaving. He simply left. The face of a man who had been a big star before the band broke up with him was hidden below the cat makeup. When everyone abandoned him, he helped make it. Old buddies ceased to communicate. And all he had left after the Northridge earthquake was a rifle and $100,000. Peter nearly gave up, but he persisted. Instead, he picked up the sticks. He returned. The voice of someone who has been forgotten, rejected, but never defeated may be heard in his biography, Make Up to Break Up. There's no celebratory drum solo on it. Then he was tested once more by fate. Cancer. When he fell, what prevented him from dying? What caused a hero to be expelled from the tale he created? And how could the catman, the outsider, the abandoned, Peter Criss, continue to live, struggle, and beat his own heart till it stopped? The early stages of that story are just beginning. This is the birthplace of Peter Criss. George Peter John Crescala in Brooklyn, New York, on December 20, 1945. The weak of heart are not welcome here. Peter was raised in an Italian immigrant family. The eldest child was him. He thus had to cope with conflicts after school, filthy streets, and loud automobile horns. He was not taught music in a cozy practice area. Rather, he carried it out in the violent realm of street gangs, where one was either beaten or engaged in combat. And he learned one thing from this sight. To stay alive, you had to snarl like a wildcat and fight with all your strength. Peter's family lived in a tiny apartment and had low-paying jobs. His mother, Loretta, was a strong-willed Catholic who maintained order in the home with rigorous rules and a strong faith, while his father, Joseph, was a quiet worker. She was the first to recognize her son's gift as a singer, and her small kitchen provided a secure haven for him away from the bustle outside. Peter once said that he tapped spoons on the kitchen table to learn how to play the drums. He said that over time, he transformed every commonplace object into a musical instrument. However, his soul was not profoundly altered by rock music. It was jazz. His early years were filled with the piercing snaps of Buddy Rich's snare drums and Gene Krupa's. Later on, he would refer to these 2 men as the drumming gods. Long afternoons spent in Greenwich Village, where parks were crowded with street artists who considered them like sacred spaces, fostered that love. Peter, however, was not a reclusive dreamer. He was in a gang and sold improvised guns to make ends meet in the wild post-war environment. He had nearly been apprehended by the police and had been in fights that left his face bloody. Because he had been so near to the edge, Peter understood the value of music as a means of salvation rather than a means of becoming famous. For Peter Criss, music was the only escape from the chaos, rage, and poverty that dominated Brooklyn following World War II. I needed to survive. He therefore felt it as his destiny, whereas others saw Kiss as merely a band. The employment of Peter Criss did not occur overnight. To become a professional musician, he had to put in a lot of effort and sweat. He performed on filthy stages at a dilapidated Brooklyn tavern with only a few inebriated patrons. In high school, Peter pursued his dream of becoming a painter by attending the School of Industrial Art in Manhattan. However, fate was not shown in a picture. He became interested in drumming after frequently slinking out of class to attend live jazz performances in Greenwich Village. Things changed when he ran into his old friend Jerry Nolan, who would later become the drummer for the New York Dolls. Jerry ignited the love that would burn throughout Peter's life and taught him his first beats. Criss's early bands included the Barracudas, Chelsea, and most famously, Lips, which he founded in the late 1960s with guitarist Stan Penridge. Even though the band primarily performed covers in low-cost East Coast pubs at the time, Lips was Peter's first significant step toward becoming a rock star. Although Peter didn't become famous during these years, they did make him resilient, tough, and unbreakable on stage. Those are all significant in the realm of hardcore music. Peter knocked without waiting for the ideal moment. He built the door himself. In 1972, he placed a brief ad with a daring statement in Rolling Stone magazine. A singer-drummer is searching for a band to assist them achieve success. After seeing the advertisement, these two teenage musicians are seeking more musicians to collaborate with them on a new project. Gene Simmons and Paul Stanley, too. Just a few weeks after the audition, Peter Criss was hired as the drummer for an unidentified band that had no management, no record deal, nothing but a dream and a little bit of lunacy. However, that marked the beginning of a new era for both him and rock music as a whole. Achievement at work. A spark was ignited in the dark when the word Kiss was first used in 1973. New York City bar sides that caught fire and gained notoriety. With his black and white facial paint and catman mask, Peter Criss was more than that. He was inextricably linked to the founding gang. Ace Frehley, the spaceman with the electric shock, Paul Stanley, the sweet seductress, Gene Simmons, the bloody devil, and Peter, the wildcat. Full of fire, quick to act, and sensitive. At the time, Kiss was unlike any other band. They presented something that had never been seen before. Rock songs were played as though the world were ending tomorrow, and there were platform boots nearly 2 feet high, fog, fake blood, and pyrotechnics. Despite all of the sounds and odors, Peter Criss was always noticeable while playing the drums. It was more than just his distinct jazz rock sound. It was also the aura of an uncertain artist and his wounded voice. He was more than just a drummer. He narrated the story with each hit, whether it was loud like a hurricane or quiet like water leaking through a mask. Swiftly dominated the American youth scene with a series of debut records. Kiss. 1974. In 1974, it was Hotter Than Hell. And 1975's Dressed to Kill. However, it wasn't until Destroyer, 1976, that the band truly took off, partly because to the unexpected song Beth. I hear you calling, Beth, but I'm not available at the moment. Hearing the first few words made people feel something deep inside. In the context of Kiss's party-loving music, Beth is a straightforward, melancholy love ballad. It was inspired by Peter's own tumultuous marriage. Sang as if he were a musician who sacrificed everything for music, even his loved ones. Kiss's first #1 single on the Billboard charts was Beth. It also demonstrated that actual people with actual wounds were hiding behind the masks. Kiss released several significant albums after Destroyer, including Love Gun in 1977 and Rock and Roll Over in 1976. It was the band's heyday. Peter began the show with Black Diamond and concluded it with Beth. Amid all the lights and noise, the soft voice. His approach was a blend of jazz, swing, and classic rock, which set him apart from the speed and skill-focused metal drummers of the era. The only person who could make the drums sound emotive was Peter, even if he wasn't the best at playing them. In a world full of shouts, he left a sigh. However, the light does not remain on indefinitely. Behind the #1 hits and painted masks, cracks were showing. And the first person to be driven away from the limelight would be Peter, the most insane of them all. But that's a tale for another day. Because Kiss was achieving unprecedented heights at this time in 1977, when the Catman was still the dominant force in rock and roll. Life is full of problems. Kiss as a band did not disband. They shoved him away. Peter was the band's original drummer, Beth's voice, and its unadulterated, instinctive spirit. Kiss's name was gradually fading within the group he helped form in 1979, when he was still quite successful. Peter felt increasingly isolated as a result of his ongoing issues with Gene Simmons and Paul Stanley, arguments over art, odd behavior in the studio, and growing drug and alcohol addiction. Because someone else had to play the drums, he was unable to complete certain performances or records. His face was remained on the cover when Unmasked, 1980 was released, but he didn't play any drums. Previously a co-founder, he was no longer involved. His right hand was broken in a severe vehicle accident that followed, leaving him with the fear that he might never be able to drum again. His personal life was collapsing, his career was in jeopardy, and his fame was eroding. His mental state deteriorated after his first wife left him. He used to benefit from music, but now it was a drag. Another setback occurred in 1991 when a homeless man in California pretended to be Peter Criss and disseminated false information claiming that the well-known Kiss drummer was now a lost and addicted mess. It was picked up by the news. The public became enraged. To regain his true name, Peter had to appear on the Phil Donahue Show and confront the imposter face to face. He wasn't angry. He was depressed. In a world that Jesus once illuminated, people now have greater faith in a shadow than in him. But it didn't stop there. Ultimately, Peter was dangerously and indirectly accused of harboring anti-Semitic beliefs by Paul Stanley, his former bandmate. Peter claimed that the accusation was an affront to his character and rejected it. These public altercations had a tragic underbelly. They referred to one another as brothers. In 2004, Peter was let go from Kiss for the final time. He was informed over the phone that he was too elderly to perform 2-hour shows, but there was no formal meeting or farewell. It was embarrassing, as Peter described it. Again, the band he helped form silently and coldly stripped him of his musical identity. 3 years later, in 2007, Peter received the news that he had breast cancer. This disease is extremely rare in men, and particularly rarer in the rock community. He remains silent. There is no advertising or press. He continued to live in secret, had surgery in private, and received cancer treatment in secret. This time, Peter didn't fight anyone. Because he had been afraid of dying since the war, he simply battled his own body. However, such trials did not kill Peter Criss. They transformed him. He changed from being an insane percussionist to a genuine yet traumatized man. And who led an honest, complete, and fantasy-free existence. Outside of the entertainment industry, the Catman was a rough-and-tumble entertainer who was constantly searching for inner serenity. Peter Criss kept his private life private. There were bits of truth in what he stated that had not been altered or revised. After his first marriage to Rocky, Peter is currently wed to Gigi Criss, his third wife. He has experienced grief and sorrow, but he has also discovered love and serenity once more. He once claimed that if it weren't for music, particularly the drums, he could have turned to stealing. Growing up in Brooklyn, Peter turned to music as a means of escape from the shadows. He frequently encountered gangs and violence. "Music saved me from myself," he remarked. Anger, loneliness, and a sense of abandonment were all released with each drum beat. It was more than a piece of equipment. A soul that had been on the verge of despair found solace in drumming. After years of drunkenness and depression, Peter ultimately faced a life-threatening battle with breast cancer, which is extremely uncommon in men. He was scared or didn't want people to feel sorry for him, so he kept his condition a secret for a long time. He endured the operations and radiation treatments in silence, and his entire left breast was removed. When he eventually came out, he did so to appreciate life as a gift that he wanted to treasure each day rather than to gain attention. Despite the worst weather, Peter and his companion, Gigi, were able to find tranquility. His crazy upbringing was unable to provide him with this. They both took care of their pets and published a book. Away from the commotion, their life was pleasant and peaceful. Even though he no longer performs on stage, Peter Criss continues to play the drums every day. He is not asked to do anything. He is under no obligation to entertain. He continues to play after sitting down and placing the sticks on the drum head. He knows no other way to live than that. The renowned percussionist Peter Criss will always be remembered. Since every beat was created by actual souls and every song was an honest confession from the heart, he was never the greatest drummer in the world. A different story about the losers, the abandoned, and the souls that yearned to be heard was told by Peter using the drums in the back. The drums typically serve only as a backdrop, allowing other instruments to take center stage. With the use of fire, blood, lighting, and manufactured violence, Kiss may have gained international recognition. But without Peter's human touch, the band would have been just another mindless entertainment machine. Everything was altered by the song Beth, which was composed when the vocalist was alone herself and performed unfiltered. Kiss's song created a new place in rock music where melancholy could be heard beneath the lights and smoke, despite the fact that radio stations didn't play it. Peter had a highly distinctive drumming style that combined jazz and rock. It was theatrical and wild, but it was never careless. Many young drummers learned how to play with their hearts from him. However, his use of the drums to combat the emptiness that just moves people, not teaches them, was what truly left an impression. It's not simply music that Peter Criss left behind. Additionally, he established a custom of being brutally honest with oneself. He never made an effort to conceal his drug usage, betrayals, or death phobia. Fans admired him more for being genuine than for having a flawless appearance, not as a celebrity, but as a friend and someone who had lost their way. Discovered it once more and kept the truth in his heart. Peter was a brilliant man without the desire for accolades. Beth's devotees, who used to listen to her on lonely evenings and recognized themselves in her hoarse voice, are the source of the real reality. He said that if it weren't for music, he could have turned to stealing, but he picked up the drums, and they saved him and the last of a generation. Peter Criss isn't the catman on stage anymore. A man in his 80s and his third wife, Gigi Criss, live in tranquility in New Jersey. He still has a great need for music, even if the drums are silent and the flames and smoke have long since passed. Peter hasn't been spotted playing the drums in public since a farewell performance at the Cutting Room in New York in 2017, where he declared his retirement. Instead, he writes, works in his own studio, and works on very personal projects, including an unpublished children's book. In an incomplete solo record. His health was once in danger from male breast cancer, which is uncommon and frequently disregarded, but it has since stabilized. According to Peter, he continues to receive routine checks and leads a life free of cancer, but he never takes any chances. The disease that once seemed to be the end of the world is now a daily reminder to live life to the fullest. However, his resilient spirit, which remains irate and unrepentant, is even more remarkable than his physical recovery. And unwavering in his convictions. Peter has never relinquished his right to speak the truth about loyalty, honor, and heritage, despite the years that have passed since he left Kiss for good. He occasionally gives brief interviews to show the world that beneath the black and white, there was a man who was wounded, frail, and unbeatable, not to defend himself. For his supporters, Peter Criss is more than simply a rhythmic symbol anymore. Being a man who lost everything, he is also a symbol of strength. He was kicked out of the band. Despite his wealth, health, and pride, he rose once more, subtly but visibly. He might not even be holding on to a drumstick at this stage of his life. Rather, he is incredibly grateful to everyone who ever listened to his heartbeat. Peter Criss, the man with the scarred heart and the cat makeup, was never a showy person. By yelling in the dark and having the courage to plunge into the abyss and emerge with his hands bloody, he rose to fame. Simply to continue living his life. In a music industry filled with phony heroes and tales that are frequently influenced by exaggerated recollections or media myths, Peter Criss is the real deal, flawed, hurting, and stubborn. Actually, that's what sets him apart. Not because he was a founding member of Kiss or because Beth made the band famous on the radio, but because he was a real man. He never apologized for who he was, and he never denied the anguish or the sadness. According to Peter, if it weren't for the drums, I might have turned into a criminal. What may appear to be a joke has a profound significance. Music making was more than a pastime. It was a means of escape, survival, and reconciliation. And with every rhythm he produced, listeners heard more than simply music. They heard a heartbeat, a cry, and a plea. Even though Peter Criss is nearly 80 years old and no longer able to play the drums, he still has the ability to tell stories. The tale of a poor Brooklyn youngster who reached the biggest platform in the world only to be denied his own dream. Nevertheless, a tale of a person who never gave up. When was the first time you were afraid of a drum beat? Remember when Beth put a stop to the night? If you do, please share your thoughts with Peter Criss in the comments section below. According to him, music is only truly alive when someone is still paying attention.